You try and perfect something and you can perfect it to death. Better than food, man. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Better Than Food Book Reviews. Hope you're doing well. Great to see you as always. I got an espresso machine. Just a little cheap one. It's pretty cool. It's like a little manual lever. I'll show it to you sometime. It's pretty rad. Definitely does the trick. Anyways, hope you're all doing well. Young Man with a Horn by Dorothy Baker. This is the first jazz novel, according to the American jazz critic Gary Giddens, who wrote The Afterword, who also mentions that the story is now archetypal. This was published in 1938. It's a Los Angeles story that turns into a New York story, and so you get the best of both worlds. It's inspired by the music of the highly influential 1920s American jazz musician Bix Beiderbecke, who died at the age of 28. To get an idea of his sound, follow the link in the description box below and listen to Singin the Blues. The Young Man with a Horn is Rick Martin, a young white kid in LA, who starts working at a bowling alley and befriends this black kid named Smoke Jordan. They start hanging out and bond over jazz. Since he wants to be a drummer, Smoke has developed this sort of rhythm in the way he walks and the way he sweeps. It's a great character description. His method of sweeping is described as something good to listen to from start to finish. It had its drawbacks, however, from a utilitarian standpoint. It raised an awful dust and it didn't get anywhere. Smoke becomes Rick's best friend. And they bond over smoking. They have this little ritual where they smoke cigarettes together. There's this line, though, that isn't apparent to Rick at first, but, then it starts to dawn on him, because Rick is white and Smoke is black. And, this is in the 20s. But the lines eventually dissolve. And that's one of the most beautiful things about the book. They have their rituals where they smoke cigarettes and they go and listen to these jazz performers at this local club, but they stand in the alley, even though Smoke is a regular, because either, Rick is too young to get in, or because he's white, or both. Eventually, Smoke introduces him to the players, whom he knows. He's friends with them. And there's a great scene of all of them going to pick up this bottle of gin, in Prohibition era, and Rick having his first drink, which will be, of course, the first of too many. You know how the story goes. He's a white boy who is accepted by, befriends, and is educated by black musicians. And it's the best part of the book, him hanging out with them, meeting Smoke's friends and family, and dissolving the barrier of racism. But of course, it's awkward for both of them, and you get the subtleties of that. That's what I love so much about the book. It doesn't shy away from the fact that we all have some degree of prejudice, but it's not trying to send a hard-line message. It explores the subject naturally without trying to push a social, political agenda. As in, all the characters behave like people. Real people with their fears, flaws, and desires. And so they teach Rick how to play the trumpet and piano. And man, does he play. That coffee's so good. This is the very beginning of the book. In the first place, maybe he shouldn't have got himself mixed up with Negroes. It gave him a funny slant on things and he never got over it. It gave him a feeling for undisciplined expression, a hot, direct approach, a full-throated ease that never did him any final good in his later dealings with those of his race, those whom civilization has whipped into shape, those who can contain themselves and play what's written. But whether he should have or shouldn't have doesn't matter much now. Giddens said in the afterwords, Baker's black characters had few if any precedence in white American literature. They are human beings and artists. They don't say gwine and suh or roll their white eyes as they do in Hemingway and most of his contemporaries. They are middle class. They are not victims or symbols. The first line of Book 1, maybe he shouldn't have got himself mixed up with Negroes, is sardonically ironic. These Negroes are Rick's emotional and cultural kinfolk, specifically the players in Jeff Williams' band and Smoke Jordan's family. Jeff Williams is the guy who plays in the band at the club that they stand in the alley and listen to. So it's this rise and fall story that we've all come to know, the obsessed musician who just pushes it too far. And eventually, you push too hard and then it turns around and goes the opposite direction. You try and perfect something and you can perfect it to death. It doesn't feel like a cliche even though you know the story. So he learns to play from his friends. And later on he plays in some white bands and becomes discovered. But something's missing though. Even though he's blowing everybody away. No pun intended. Trumpet. It's clear that Rick's got that thing, whatever it is. Driven by who knows what, given by who knows who. Passion, talent, obsession, jazz, right? But like a lot of blessings, it's also a curse. The obsession becomes self-destructive. Baker outlines it all in the prologue. She tells you what happens. She tells you the whole story, but you don't mind. It's a classic rise and fall story. But the thing about the protagonist, Rick Martin, is that there's a purity that keeps him from rising too high, right? So it's sort of this quiet, almost an internal rise and fall. Or one that only the jazz obsessives, like the real musicians who know good jazz, see and are aware of. This also brings up the idea of, diluting great music to make it accessible to the public, to make it mainstream. It also displays this blatant racism amongst the leaders of the white bands, who are also inferior, I might add, as musicians. Bix Beiderbecke's death was from, or at least a significant contributing factor seemed to be, alcohol. Rick shares his taste and fate. That's where the similarities end, though, according to Giddens. This is the first of Dorothy Baker's that I've read, and she is a sharp observer of the mannerisms and behaviors of men. She writes them very well. It's not quite as surprising once you read that she said that she was seriously hampered by an abject admiration for Ernest Hemingway. She captures the impossibility of accurately articulating the spirit of jazz, right? Yeah, how the hell do you write what jazz is? I mean, that's an incredible thing. Music in general, it's so personal. But I mean, jazz especially, because it's so much about like feeling. I mean, like when you're playing it too. Her knowledge is really extensive. Just and you can tell in her descriptions of the players and what they're paying attention to and what they're doing and how they're like playing off of one another. And jazz is so much about that. That reading and feeling. Not even reading, because you're like it's like feeling the people that you're playing with. Just through repetition and experience. I love jazz. I love jazz. I got a book too called The History of Jazz, which I need to review, by Ted something. And the history of jazz is fascinating. It's interesting. I was just walking up in Midtown the other day, and I was walking by that McDonald's on Woodward, if you know Detroit. Woodward is this main street in Detroit, and there's a McDonald's up there made out of brick, and I learned today that where that McDonald's sits on Woodward, that's where the Greystone Ballroom used to be, and Bix Beiderbecke used to play there with the Gene Goldkette Orchestra. Yeah, the Greystone Ballroom on Woodward in Detroit, and I had no idea, but I learned that today, and they demolished it years back. But who else? I think Duke Ellington also played there, and Ella Fitzgerald. So it's like there's ghosts everywhere, and Detroit has a lot of ghosts of musical eras past. A lot of that around here. You can it's saturated with it. Yeah, it's a hell of an interesting city. I think I'm going to review a book about Detroit for patrons soon. So if you donate $1 or more on Patreon, you know the drill, you can get access to that. So it's a straightforward narrative, very suited for a film adaptation. And there was a film adaptation with Kirk Douglas and Lauren Bacall and Doris Day. I haven't seen it yet. I watched the trailer on YouTube. It looks awesome, but very different from the book. This is about jazz. It's about, it's I don't know what you want to call it. It's like bohemian. It's punk. It's not like the showbiz story of the film adaptation. It's like this. It's the film adaptation, of course, for the era. It's so dramatic and overwrought, but which is great in its own way. I love to watch old films like that. But this one is quiet. It's a subdued story of musical obsession and that leading to self-destruction. This internal implosion. Oh man, the ending is great too. I just want to read the ending, because Smoke is there, his best friend till the end, and what is it? They put him in an ambulance after he's got like pneumonia or double pneumonia or something, and he's dying in this hospital. They're trying to cure him of alcoholism, but they put him in this ambulance, and the sun was in Rick's face. Smoke reached up and pulled down the blind. Then he settled back and said, "I knew a guy once that took a cure," and he said. But he stopped it there because he suddenly knew that it wasn't getting over. He looked down and saw Rick's face. He watched, stunned, and while he was watching, Rick died. He could tell when it happened. There was a difference. And that's it. That's very Hemingway, you know, the short, definitive statement. That's how it was. That actually reminds me of the end of Under the Volcano by Malcolm Lowry, who was also a notorious alcoholic. And when was Under the Volcano written? So Under the Volcano, literature and alcoholism, they're just married. So that didn't come out until 9 years later. But Under the Volcano, it was like the last line of Under the Volcano. It was terrific. He dies as well, and it's somebody threw a dead dog after him down the ravine. It's the most brutal line. Much darker story. But this is also, you know, I don't know why that reminded me of it. Anyways, but the narrator is unique in this because we don't know who it is. And Giddens says they're not a musician, but it's a sustained elegy, the account of a biographer masquerading as a memoirist. So they're like a character, but then they're sort of detached from it, pulled outside of it. And oh, it's weird. It's but you roll with it. It's like it doesn't really make sense and it doesn't really obey the rules, and that's great, you know. And it feels like it's a male character, which is interesting because it was written by a woman. She's great. She's really, really something else, I'm telling you. Baker clearly knew her jazz. The technical details are impressive, and I'm lost most of the time, but the excitement felt by the jazz musicians when they see something great is communicated to laymen like myself. And that in itself is an accomplishment, you know, to get through to people who don't know anything about jazz, who might like it, but really don't know the first thing about it, which is definitely me. Who's your favorite jazz musician? I love Bill Evans. Bill Evans is like probably my favorite. Or Mingus. I mean, I love Charles Mingus. Two very different musicians, but I think those are probably my two favorites. Black Saint and the Sinner Lady is one of my all-time favorites. Plus his version of Moanin' is incredible. It's so, but I liked that when I was younger. I just because it was so, what do you want to call it? Bombastic. I don't know. It was like swagger. And like Mingus has this total fuck you swagger to him, and I just loved that. He's kind of punk. He's just such a badass. Bill Evans is much more sad, quiet, beautiful. But it also feels like an authentic depiction of people from that era, from that time and era. You know, it feels like you're reading the stories of real people. We look at films of the time or little clips of artifice, and we see the photos, we see everything done up, but they're so stylized and they hide so much of the cadence and flaw of reality, the veracity of life at that time, you know, the substance, the real humanity. Baker captures it. You hear the slang, you get the thoughts, the awkwardness, you know? It's not dramatic, but it's heartfelt and intelligent. It's intense, but it's in this internal fashion. It feels as if very little has actually changed, only the kind of superfluous stuff, you know, the drive for, the obsessive drive for perfection is still, like that's the story, right? You still see people so obsessed that they burn out and die by 30. There's this scene where the musicians just meet up and get some booze and they go and sit for hours and hours and hours playing, and by the end of it, you know, one of them, his shirt is soaked all the way through in sweat, and the guitarist's fingers are bleeding, and it's like, man, what drives people to that level, right? It's like a possession and an exorcism. So Rick gets wildly successful, makes a lot of money, marries a woman he shouldn't have, drinks way too much, and surprise, it doesn't work out, and dies quietly next to his friend Smoke, his first and last and always. While it isn't a happy ending, you get the feeling that it couldn't have gone any other way. It does feel like a recollection of the best nights of a man's life, in a warm, drunken haze, the best nights that you can't recall in entirety, but you knew the music was some of the best you ever heard. So that's all it is. The quiet, short life and death of a jazz man. There's not a lot on Dorothy Baker, the author of Young Man with a Horn, who was born in Missoula and raised in California. She wrote a few novels and described jazz as the only thing except writing that I had a consistent long-term interest in. She wrote another novel called Cassandra at the Wedding, which looks really good. If anybody's read that, let me know how it was in the comments below. I'd appreciate it. But who should read this one? Anyone who likes jazz. period. Especially if you're interested in the history or the variations in styles. I'm sure this will be a gateway. And if you've never had any interest, but you like jazz, or you like the sound of liking jazz or something like that, or you like the sound of jazz history, then just read this and then go from there. Because, Bix Beiderbecke, once you hit that vein, that's going to take you all over the place. You hit Louis Armstrong and Bix Beiderbecke, and then you're going to go off, and there you're going to get to all sorts of great stuff. Also, fans of Fat City by Leonard Gardner, definitely check this out. Ask the Dust by John Fonte. Anybody who likes LA stories, this is one of those LA stories. It does take place in New York a little bit, but it feels like an LA story. On the Road by Jack Kerouac, of course. Also a book with great descriptions of jazz. If you like Bukowski, maybe if you liked Day of the Locust by Nathaniel West. And if you enjoyed the movie Whiplash, Rick has that same kind of blind obsession as the kid in that film, practicing constantly, focused solely on his instrument. It's a good film. I thought that was a good film. One of the last new films that I really thought was pretty solid. Better Than Food. Now who's going to get it for the coffee lottery? Coffee Lottery, for those of you who are new, is where I take all of the names of the patrons who have donated $5 or more per video on Patreon, and I place their names into this mason jar, and I pull out a name for every review I do, and I send a hard copy of the book I'm reviewing along with a bag of coffee roasted by yours truly. And if you'd like to get in on that, you can head to the description box below and click on the link, go to patreon.com/books are better than food, donate $5 or more per video. Sincerely appreciate it. Thank you so much to everybody who has donated. Thank you to all the new patrons. Best of luck to all of you. You're making all of this possible. Thank you. Thank you so much. And the coffee is really good. I mean, really, it's delicious. I've just had some. I'm flying right now. Way too much caffeine. All right. Young Man with a Horn, Dorothy Baker. Who's going to get it? Here we go. Oh, cool. Julia. Awesome. Thank you so much for the support, Julia. Really means a lot. You're going to receive Young Man with a Horn by Dorothy Baker and a bag of delicious coffee. So, once again, if you'd like to get entered into the coffee lottery, you can head to the description box below and click the link. Thank you so much. If you donate $1 or more on Patreon, you can get access to exclusive patron-only reviews. Short stories, essays, self-help books, all kinds of stuff. I'm going to be releasing some great ones soon. One of them definitely on a Detroit book. Please subscribe if you have not already. You can also find me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Would really appreciate a like on Facebook. That'd be awesome. Hope you're all doing well. It was great to see you. Hope you're reading something better than food. And hope you're listening to some great jazz. You can check out the Bix Beiderbecke playlist on Spotify in the description box as well. Always remember, die reading. Not from alcoholism. Please, limit your drinking. But I'll leave it at that. So, great to see you. Hope you're doing well. Talk to you soon. Have a good night. Ciao.